Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sandals of ancient Greeks, living through one of history's most surprising plot twists. Picture this. You're lounging in your chitin, maybe sipping some watered down wine, when suddenly the underdogs of the Greek world decide they're tired of being everyone's punching bag. You know Sparta, right? Those guys who supposedly never lost a battle. Well, spoiler alert tree, they're about to get schooled by their neighbors from Thebes. And honestly, if you were placing bets back then, you probably would have lost your entire olive harvest on this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I love knowing there are people all over the world drifting off to these ancient stories at different hours. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a dusty road outside Thebes in the year 382 BCE. The morning sun catches the limestone walls of the city, making them glow like honey. You can smell the familiar mix of wood smoke, baking bread, and that particular Mediterranean dust that gets into everything. But something feels different today. There's tension in the air, thick as the summer heat. You adjust your himation. That's your cloak, by the way, and notice how the Theban guards at the gate seem more alert than usual. Their bronze spear tips gleam wickedly in the sunlight. One of them, a young man with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, keeps glancing toward the south, toward Sparta. See, here's the thing about Thebes that most people forget. This city has been playing second fiddle to everyone for centuries. Athens got all the glory for democracy and philosophy. Sparta got the reputation for being unbeatable warriors. Thebes got to be the place armies marched through on their way to fight more important battles. You walk closer to the city walls, your leather sandals crunching on the gravel path. A merchant passes by, his donkey loaded with amphorae of olive oil. He nods politely, but you catch the worry lines around his eyes. Everyone in Thebes knows change is coming. They can feel it in their bones. The city itself sprawls before you, not as grand as Athens or as militaristic as Sparta, but there's something solid about it. Something enduring. The houses are built of local stone, practical and sturdy. Smoke rises from countless chimneys where families are preparing their morning meal of barley, porridge, and figs. You hear the sound of bronze on bronze echoing from somewhere within the city walls. Training. Always training. But lately, the training has taken on a new intensity. New techniques are being whispered about in the agora. New formations. New ideas from a man whose name is just beginning to be spoken with reverence, Epaminondas. A cool breeze stirs the dust at your feet, carrying with it the scent of wild thyme from the nearby hills. You breathe deeply, trying to capture this moment before everything changes. Because change is coming to Thebes, whether its people are ready or not. The guards shift their positions slightly, and you notice how they move with a precision that wasn't there just a few years ago. These aren't just farmers with spears anymore. These are becoming soldiers, real soldiers. You think about the stories your grandfather used to tell, about the great days when Thebes stood alongside Athens and Sparta against the Persian invaders. When Theban warriors fought and died at Plataea, helping to save all of Greece from foreign conquest. Those were the days when Thebes mattered, when Thebes was more than just a way station between more important places. Maybe, just maybe, those days are coming back. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows begin to shrink. Somewhere in the city, in a modest house near the agora, a young man named Epaminondas is probably bent over his scrolls, reading philosophy and military treatises with equal passion. He doesn't know it yet, but he's about to become the most important person in Thebes, maybe in all of Greece. You turn to look south again, toward the distant mountains that hide Sparta. Down there, in their austere valleys, the Spartans continue their endless training. They practice their formations, perfect their bronze-tipped spears, and maintain their reputation as the finest warriors the world has ever seen. They have no idea what's coming. A bird calls from somewhere overhead, a hawk circling lazily in the warming air. You watch it for a moment, remembering how your mother used to say that hawks were omens. Good or bad depended on which direction they flew. This one is flying north. You pull your Himation closer around your shoulders, even though the day is warming. There's something in the air today, something that makes the hair on your arms stand up slightly. It's the feeling you get before a thunderstorm, when the very atmosphere seems to hold its breath. Thebes is holding its breath too, waiting, preparing, growing stronger in ways that no one outside its walls quite understands yet. Inside the city, children are playing in the narrow streets, their laughter mixing with the sounds of daily life. Potters shape clay on their wheels. Blacksmiths hammer bronze into tools and weapons. Merchants haggle over prices in the agora. Life goes on as it always has. But underneath it all, something new is steering. Something that will, in just a few short years, turn the Greek world upside down and make everyone remember that Thebes, quiet, stubborn Thebes, has never forgotten how to fight. The sleeping giant is beginning to stir. You're walking through the narrow streets of Thebes on a crisp autumn morning in 378 BCE. The air smells of roasted barley and the last roses of the season. Your breath makes small clouds in the cool air as you make your way toward the gymnasium, where something extraordinary is about to unfold. The cobblestones beneath your feet are still slick with morning dew. You pull your woolen cloak tighter as you pass a baker's shop, where the warm scent of fresh bread mingles with the sharper smell of olive oil heating in bronze pans. A few early customers huddle around the shop's entrance, their voices low and urgent. Everyone's talking about the same thing these days, the new military unit, the one that's unlike anything Greece has ever seen before. You pause at a fountain where women are drawing water for their households. Their amphorae clinks softly against the stone rim as they fill them. One woman, her graying hair bound with a simple bronze pin, leans closer to her neighbor and whispers something that makes both of them glance around nervously. They're talking about love and war, and how, for the first time in human history, someone has figured out how to make those two forces work together. You continue walking, your sandals clicking against the stones. The gymnasium comes into view, a long, rectangular building with columns that cast sharp shadows in the morning light. But today, there's something different about the usual training sounds echoing from within. Instead of the random clatter of individual practice, you hear something more coordinated, more intimate. A cat darts across your path, pausing to look at you with those unblinking yellow eyes before disappearing into an alley between two houses. You smile despite your nervousness. Cats always seem to know when something important is happening. At the gymnasium's entrance, you nod to the guard, an older man with scars on his arms that tell stories of battles fought long ago. He recognizes you and waves you through with a grunt. Inside, the familiar smell of olive oil, sweat and leather greets you like an old friend. But what you see stops you in your tracks. 150 men are arranged in pairs throughout the training ground. Not just any men. These are some of Thebes' finest young warriors, their bodies bronzed from sun and training, their eyes bright with something that goes beyond mere martial pride. These pairs aren't random training partners, they're lovers. You watch as one young man, perhaps 20 years old with dark curls clinging to his forehead, adjusts his partner's grip on a training spear. The gesture is gentle, almost tender, but there's nothing soft about the deadly precision of the movement he's correcting. His partner, slightly older, with a thin scar running along his jaw, nods and repeats the motion. Perfect, deadly beautiful. This is Gorgidas' vision coming to life, the sacred band of Thebes. Here's what makes this absolutely brilliant, and why no one else thought of it first. Gorgidas understood something about human nature that every other military commander had missed. When you're fighting next to your beloved, the person you'd die for anyway, you don't just fight harder, you fight smarter. You anticipate each other's moves. You become two parts of the same deadly organism. A trainer walks between the pairs, his voice calm but authoritative as he calls out instructions. Remember, you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting the man you love most in the world. How does that change your stance? How does that change your courage? You move closer to observe one particular pair. The younger man has gentle hands but fierce eyes. His partner moves with the fluid grace of someone who's spent years perfecting his craft. When they spar, it's like watching a conversation in bronze and leather. They know where the other will be before he moves there. The afternoon light slants through the high windows, casting everything in golden hues. Dust motes dance in the beams of sunlight, and somewhere a dove coos softly from the rafters. It's almost peaceful, if you ignore the fact that you're watching the creation of the most effective killing unit in Greek history. One of the pairs takes a break, sitting together on a stone bench near the wall. The older partner produces a small wineskin and they share it, talking quietly about technique and tactics. But you catch the way the younger man's hand rests briefly on his partner's shoulder, the way they look at each other when they think no one is watching. These men will die for each other, not just because duty demands it, but because love compels it. You think about the Spartan warriors who have dominated Greek warfare for centuries. They're magnificent fighters, disciplined and deadly, but they fight for honor, for their city, for abstract concepts like glory and duty. Noble reasons, certainly. But how do you compete with someone who's fighting for the person sitting next to them at breakfast that morning? Someone who knows that if they fail, the man they've whispered secrets to in the darkness will die. A horn sounds somewhere in the distance, probably from the city walls, marking the passage of another hour. The training session begins to wind down, and you watch as the pairs help each other clean and oil their weapons. Again, it's those small intimacies that catch your attention. The way one man carefully inspects his partner's spear point for nicks, the way another adjusts his beloved's leather armor with practiced familiarity. As you prepare to leave, one of the younger warriors catches your eye and smiles. There's something serene about his expression, as if he's found exactly where he belongs in the world. His partner joins him, and they walk toward the exit together, their conversation low and comfortable. You follow them out into the cooling evening air. The sky is turning the deep blue of approaching night, and the first stars are beginning to appear. The two men part ways at a street corner, one heading toward the potter's quarter, the other toward the area where the metalworkers live. But before they separate, they clasp hands briefly, a small gesture, barely noticeable. But you notice, and you understand that you've just witnessed something that will change everything. Tomorrow, these men will train again. They'll perfect their formations, sharpen their weapons, and deepen the bonds that make them stronger than the sum of their parts. And someday soon, they'll march out of Thebes to face enemies who have no idea what's coming for them. Love, it turns out, might just be the most powerful weapon of all. You're sitting in a modest courtyard in Thebes, the kind of place where philosophers and dreamers gather when the day's work is done. The evening air carries the scent of jasmine and wood smoke, and somewhere nearby, a lyre player practices scales that drift like silver through the gathering darkness. A single oil lamp flickers on a low table, casting dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. You wrap your himation around your shoulders as the temperature drops with the sun, and wait. Tonight, you're going to meet the man who will reshape the very idea of what it means to be a warrior. Epaminondas arrives quietly, as he always does. No fanfare, no dramatic entrance. Just a tall, lean figure emerging from the shadows like he's been part of them all along. He settles onto a stone bench across from you, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight as he arranges his simple chiton with unconscious grace. This is not what you expected a great general to look like. He's approaching 40, with the kind of face that suggests he thinks deeply about everything. There are laugh lines around his eyes, but also the deeper creases that come from carrying heavy responsibilities. His hands, long-fingered and surprisingly gentle, rest calmly in his lap as he considers how to begin. "You want to understand what we're doing here," he says, and his voice carries the warmth of honey mixed with wine. But first, tell me, what do you think makes a warrior truly dangerous? You fumble for an answer, thinking of bronze muscles and fierce battle cries. He smiles and shakes his head slightly, the gesture so gentle it doesn't feel like disagreement, more like invitation to think harder. A cat appears from nowhere and settles at his feet, beginning to purr with that low, rumbling sound that somehow makes the whole courtyard feel safer. Epaminondas reaches down absently to scratch behind its ears, never breaking eye contact with you. Most people think it's about strength, he continues, or speed, or some kind of divine rage that transforms ordinary men into heroes. But I've been studying this question for 20 years now, and I think they're all wrong. The lyre music stops, leaving only the gentle sound of water trickling from a fountain somewhere in the darkness. A night bird calls once, then falls silent. The whole world seems to be leaning in to listen. The most dangerous warrior, Epaminondas says, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, is the one who understands exactly why he's fighting. He stands and begins to pace, his movements fluid and controlled. You notice how he walks, not like a soldier, with rigid posture and measured steps, but like a dancer, every motion flowing naturally into the next. This is a man who has learned to make his entire body an extension of his mind. Take the Spartans, he says, pausing by the lamp so that shadows play across his features. Everyone thinks they're invincible because they're so disciplined, so perfectly trained. And yes, they are magnificent fighters. But do you know what their weakness is? You shake your head, genuinely curious now. They fight exactly the same way every single time. Their phalanx is a thing of beauty. 8 ranks deep, shields locked, spears bristling like a bronze hedgehog. It's worked for them for 300 years. It's worked so well that they've forgotten how to think about alternatives. A cool breeze stirs the jasmine, sending its sweet scent swirling around the courtyard. Epaminondas inhales deeply, as if drawing inspiration from the night air itself. But what happens when someone refuses to play by their rules? What happens when your enemy does something completely unexpected? He returns to his seat, leaning forward with the intensity of a teacher who has discovered the most fascinating problem in the world. The cat stretches and repositions itself, maintaining that steady purring that somehow makes profound thoughts easier to think. I've been studying warfare since I was old enough to hold a stylus, he continues. Not just Greek warfare, Persian tactics, Egyptian formations, even stories from the far north about how the Scythians fight. And you know what I've learned? Every great victory in history happened because someone saw the battle differently than everyone else expected. You watch his face in the lamplight, noting how his eyes seem to glow with an inner fire when he talks about these ideas. This is a man who has found his calling, the thing that makes him feel most alive. The sacred band that Gorgidas has created. It's brilliant, but not for the reasons people think. Yes, lovers will fight harder for each other. But more importantly, they think together. They adapt together. They become something new on the battlefield, something their enemies won't know how to counter. A owl hoots somewhere in the distance, that haunting sound that always makes you think of wisdom and ancient secrets. Epaminondas tilts his head slightly, listening, then smiles. Even the gods are paying attention. He murmurs, then looks back at you with renewed intensity. But the sacred band is just the beginning. I've been working on something else, something that will change everything. He traces patterns in the dust with his finger, not nervously, but with the careful precision of someone drawing battle formations. Lines and angles take shape, then disappear as he smooths them away and begins again. Imagine a phalanx, he says. But instead of being the same depth everywhere, it's deeper on one side, much deeper, 50 ranks deep instead of 8. What do you think happens when that formation hits a traditional phalanx? You try to visualize it, but military tactics aren't your strong suit. He sees your confusion and chuckles, the sound warm and reassuring. Think of it like water hitting a dam, he explains. Most of the water spreads out harmlessly, but if you concentrate all that force into one narrow point, he makes a sharp jabbing motion with his finger. The dam breaks, and once it breaks, the flood goes wherever it wants to go. The implications begin to dawn on you. If you could break through at one point, you could roll up the enemy line from the side, turn their strength against them, make their perfect formation into a trap. It's called the oblique attack, Epaminondas says, satisfaction evident in his voice. And no one, not the Spartans, not anyone, will see it coming until it's too late. The lamp flickers, sending shadows dancing wildly across the courtyard walls. The cat stirs, opens one eye to check that everything is still peaceful, then settles back into its contented purring. You realize you're witnessing something extraordinary, not just the birth of new military tactics, but the moment when someone's mind makes the leap from conventional thinking to genuine innovation. This quiet philosopher is about to revolutionize warfare, and he's doing it with nothing more than careful observation and relentless questioning of assumptions everyone else takes for granted. The beautiful thing about ideas, Epaminondas says softly, is that once they exist in the world, they change everything. Even if I never get the chance to use these tactics, someone else will. Someone else will see that there are always alternatives to the way things have always been done. He stands again, preparing to leave. The cat stretches luxuriously and pads away into the shadows, as if its work here is finished. Change is coming to Greece, Epaminondas says, his voice carrying a note of prophecy. The old certainties are about to crumble, and when they do, the future will belong to whoever can think most clearly about what comes next. He pauses at the edge of the lamplight, half in shadow, half in golden illumination. Get some rest, he advises gently. Tomorrow, the real work begins. You're standing in the pre-dawn darkness outside Thebes, where the training fields stretch away into shadows that seem to swallow the world. The grass beneath your feet is heavy with dew, and each step makes a soft whispering sound that mingles with the distant murmur of men preparing for something extraordinary. The air smells of wet earth and the particular metallic scent that comes from hundreds of bronze weapons being oiled and sharpened. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse whickers softly, and you hear the gentle clink of harness bronze as cavalry units prepare for their own training. A torch flares to life near you, then another and another. Soon the entire field is dotted with points of warm orange light, creating pools of illumination where men emerge from the shadows like figures from a dream. But these aren't the same soldiers you might have seen training a year ago. Something fundamental has changed. You watch as the sacred band forms up in perfect silence. 150 pairs of men, moving with a precision that seems almost supernatural in the flickering torch light. They don't need shouted orders or trumpet calls. Each man knows exactly where he belongs, and more importantly, he knows the man beside him better than he knows himself. The morning mist rises from the dew-soaked ground, creating wisps of vapor that curl around the warrior's legs like the breath of sleeping spirits. You pull your cloak tighter and move closer to observe what Epaminondas has been teaching them. Here's what's remarkable about what you're witnessing. For 3 centuries, Greek warfare has been essentially the same. 2 lines of heavily armored men crash into each other like bronze waves, and whoever can push harder wins. It's brutal, it's effective, and it's completely predictable. But Epaminondas has been thinking differently. A horn sounds, low and mournful in the gray light of approaching dawn. The sacred band begins to move, but not in the way you expect. Instead of forming the traditional phalanx, 8 men deep across the entire front, they're doing something that makes your breath catch in your throat. They're stacking themselves 50 men deep on the left side of the formation, leaving the right side almost undefended. You've never seen anything like it. It looks wrong, almost dangerous, like deliberately weakening your own army. But as you watch the precision with which they execute this maneuver, you begin to understand the genius behind it. One of the trainers, a grizzled veteran with arms like tree trunks, calls out corrections in a voice that carries easily across the field. Remember, the right side retreats slowly. You're not running away, you're buying time. Draw them forward while the left side does the real work. the real work. You watch as the massed left wing begins to advance, and suddenly you see it. 50 ranks of the finest warriors Thebes has ever produced, concentrated into a bronze-tipped spear point aimed at one specific spot in the enemy formation. A young soldier near you stumbles slightly in the complex maneuver, and his partner steadies him with one hand while keeping his shield in perfect position with the other. The gesture is so smooth, so automatic, that it's clear these men have been drilling together for months. They've become extensions of each other. The mist begins to lift as the sun climbs higher, revealing the full scope of what you're witnessing. This isn't just military training. It's the birth of something entirely new, a way of fighting that turns conventional wisdom on its head and makes strength out of apparent weakness. You notice how quiet everything is. No one is shouting orders or cursing when mistakes are made. The sacred band moves like a single organism, each pair communicating through subtle shifts in posture, the angle of a shield, the tilt of a spear. They've developed their own language of warfare, one spoken in bronze and leather and the space between heartbeats. A light breakfast is served as the sun finally clears the horizon. Barley cakes, honey and wine mixed with water. You accept a portion gratefully, your stomach rumbling with hunger and nerves. The men around you eat quietly, but there's an energy in their silence, a sense of shared purpose that makes the very air seem to vibrate. Epaminondas appears beside you as if materializing from the morning mist itself. His chiton is simple and practical, his feet bare against the dew-wet grass. But there's something about his presence that makes every man in the vicinity stand a little straighter, move a little more precisely. "What do you think?" he asks quietly, gesturing toward the assembled warriors. You struggle to find words that capture what you've witnessed. These men have been transformed from individual fighters into something entirely new. A weapon that thinks, adapts, and strikes with surgical precision. They're not just soldiers anymore, you finally manage. He nods, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. No, they're artists, and what they're creating is victory itself. The training resumes with new exercises you've never seen before. Instead of simply charging forward in a straight line, the formation wheels and turns like a living thing. The weak right side falls back in perfect order, drawing imaginary enemies forward into the trap. Meanwhile, the reinforced left side swings around like the head of a hammer, ready to crush anything caught in its path. A hawk circles overhead, riding the warming air currents with effortless grace. You watch it for a moment, remembering stories your grandmother used to tell about omens and signs. This hawk seems different somehow, larger, more purposeful. It calls once, a sharp cry that cuts through the morning air, then wheels away toward the south, toward Sparta. As the morning progresses, you begin to see how all the pieces fit together. The sacred band provides the unbreakable core of the formation. Men who will never retreat because they're fighting for each other. The oblique attack concentrates maximum force at the point of decision, and underlying it all is Epaminondas' genius for seeing warfare not as a test of courage, but as a problem to be solved through careful thought and innovative tactics. The final exercise of the morning involves coordination between the sacred band and the regular Theban troops. You watch as hundreds of men move in complex patterns across the field, each unit playing its part in a deadly choreography that turns war into art. By the time the horn sounds to end training, the sun is fully up and the mist has burned away completely. The men begin to disperse, some heading back to the city for their daily work, others continuing with weapons maintenance and individual practice. But you notice something in their faces as they clean their equipment and share water from common cups. There's confidence there, yes, but also something deeper, a kind of quiet certainty that wasn't there before. These men know they're part of something special, something that will be remembered long after their individual names are forgotten. They're writing a new chapter in the story of warfare itself, one careful drill at a time. As you walk back toward the city gates, you turn for one last look at the training field. A few men are still there, working through complex spear movements with the patient dedication of craftsmen perfecting their art. The morning light catches their bronze equipment, sending flashes of gold across the grass. Change is coming. You can feel it in your bones. You wake before dawn on July 6, 371 BCE, to the sound of bronze on leather and the low murmur of 10,000 men preparing for battle. The air outside your tent is cool and sweet with the scent of wild herbs that grow thick on these Boeotian plains. Somewhere in the distance, a lark sings its liquid song, oblivious to the history about to unfold. Your hands shake slightly as you fumble with the leather straps of your sandals. Not from fear. Well, not entirely from fear, but from the electric anticipation that runs through the entire Theban camp like wine through water. Today everything changes. You step outside and immediately understand why commanders throughout history have spoken of the hour before battle as the most beautiful and terrible time in human experience. The plain of Leuctra stretches before you in the pre-dawn grayness, dotted with cooking fires that look like fallen stars. The smell of barley porridge mingles wood smoke and the particular metallic scent of an army preparing for war. To your left, the sacred band is already forming up. 150 pairs of men moving with that eerie precision you've grown to recognize. But today there's something different in their movements. A kind of sacred solemnity, as if they understand they're about to become legend. A gentle breeze stirs the grass at your feet, carrying with it the distant sound of Spartan trumpets. They're out there, somewhere in the darkness beyond the ridge. The army that hasn't lost a major land battle in over 2 centuries. The warriors who made their names synonymous with military perfection. You think about the stories you heard growing up, how Spartan mothers told their sons to come back, with your shield or on it. How Spartan warriors combed their hair before battle, as if preparing for a religious ceremony. How they advanced to the sound of flutes, their bronze-covered ranks moving like a single bronze organism across whatever battlefield they chose to dominate. But this morning feels different. This morning you're standing with men who believe they've figured out how to beat perfection itself. Epaminondas appears beside you like a shadow given form. He's dressed simply, a plain white chiton, bronze corselet polished to mirror brightness. His father's sword at his side. But there's something about his presence that makes the very air around him seem to shimmer with possibility. Sleep well, he asks, and there's gentle humor in his voice despite everything. You admit that sleep was difficult to come by. He nods understandingly, then gestures toward the eastern horizon where the faintest hint of light is beginning to show. Good. A man should be awake for moments like this. They don't come often in a lifetime. The camp is coming alive around you now. Men emerge from tents like flowers opening to the morning light. Armor is strapped on with careful ceremony. Weapons are checked one final time. Prayers are offered to gods both familiar and foreign. Ars for courage, Athena for wisdom, and quietly, privately, to whatever household deities might be listening from far off Thebes. You notice how the men move differently today. There's none of the nervous energy you might expect before a major battle. Instead, there's a kind of focused calm, as if each warrior has found the still point at the center of himself and decided to rest there. A horse whickers somewhere in the darkness, and you hear the jingle of bronze fittings as the Theban cavalry prepares for their own role in the coming drama. They'll screen the flanks, harass the enemy, and hopefully prevent any nasty surprises. But everyone knows the real decision will be made by men on foot, with bronze spears and hoplon shields, fighting in the ancient way. The eastern sky begins to lighten, revealing the low ridge that separates the 2 armies. Beyond it, invisible but undeniably present, 11,000 Spartans and their allies are going through their own morning rituals. You try to imagine what their camp looks like. Probably neater than yours, more disciplined, with none of the quiet conversations and gentle laughter that characterize the Theban preparations. A young soldier near you is having his armor adjusted by his lover, both members of the sacred band. The older man checks each strap with meticulous care, his fingers gentle but thorough. When he's finished, they embrace briefly, foreheads touching in a gesture so intimate it feels like you're intruding just by watching. This is what the Spartans don't understand, you realize. They've built their entire military system on the idea that individual desires must be subordinated to collective discipline. Personal feelings are weaknesses to be overcome, not strengths to be harnessed. But Thebes has discovered something different, something that makes love itself into a weapon of war. The sun breaks the horizon, just the horn sounds for final formation. The entire Theban army, 6,000 men, begins to move with the patient precision of craftsmen who have practiced their art until it becomes second nature. You watch as the oblique formation takes shape. The sacred band and the best Theban troops mass 50 ranks deep on the left wing. The center and right wing spread thin, almost to the point of transparency. To any conventional military mind, it looks insane, like deliberately weakening your own army. But you've seen this formation in training. You know what it can do. Epaminondas walks among the ranks, not shouting encouragement or making grand speeches, but speaking quietly to individual men. A word here, a touch on the shoulder there. His presence alone seems to steady nerves and sharpen focus. The morning mist begins to rise from the warming earth, creating ghostly columns of vapor that drift between the formations. Birds call from somewhere in the distance, finches and larks going about their daily business, as if this day is no different from any other. But it is different. You can feel it in the way the light falls across the bronze ranks, in the way the wind carries both the scent of wild flowers and the harder smell of battle, ready men, in the way time itself seems to slow and crystallize, as if the gods want to savor this moment before releasing it into history. A trumpet sounds from beyond the ridge. The Spartans are coming. Your heart begins to beat faster, and you notice your breathing has become shallow. This is it. This is the moment when theory meets reality, when months of innovative training face centuries of proven tradition. The mist swirls thicker now, and through it you can see the first glint of bronze cresting the ridge. Spartan spear points, catching the early sunlight like deadly flowers, then shields perfectly aligned, moving forward with that machine like precision that has terrorized battlefields from Sicily to Asia. But you're not terrorized. Standing here with these Theban warriors, watching their calm confidence as they prepare to attempt the impossible, you find yourself filled with something approaching joy. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog has a secret that changes everything. The Spartans continue their advance, and you can hear their war song now. Low, rhythmic, hypnotic. It's designed to frighten enemies and coordinate movement, and you have to admit it's effective. Even knowing what you know about Theban preparations, the sound sends shivers down your spine, but the sacred band begins its own song, softer but no less powerful. It's not a war song at all, but a hymn to Eros, god of love. The irony is perfect. Love songs answered by war chants, as if the entire cosmos is about to discover which force is stronger. The sun climbs higher, burning away the last wisps of mist and revealing both armies in their full, terrible glory. The dance of death is about to begin. The collision comes at exactly the moment when the morning sun reaches its perfect angle, turning every bronze spear point into a needle of light. You stand frozen as 11,000 Spartans and their allies crash into 6,000 Thebans, with a sound like thunder splitting the earth in half. But this isn't the chaotic melee you expected. This is precision violence, choreographed destruction, a deadly ballet performed by masters of their craft. The Spartan right wing hits the thin Theban, right exactly as Epaminondas planned. You watch his men give ground slowly, step by careful step, their shields locked and spears bristling as they execute the most difficult maneuver in warfare. A fighting retreat that doesn't become a rout. They're not running, they're dancing. A young Theban soldier stumbles as he backs away from a Spartan spear thrust. For a heartbeat, you think he's done for. But the man beside him shifts slightly, his shield covering the gap, his own spear darting forward to force the Spartan back. The stumbling soldier recovers, nods his thanks, and the deadly dance continues. This is what months of training have created, not just individual warriors, but a thinking, breathing organism that adapts to threats faster than any enemy can exploit weaknesses. Meanwhile, on the left wing, something unprecedented is happening. The sacred band advances in perfect silence, 50 ranks deep, like a bronze spear point aimed at the heart of Spartan pride. You've never seen anything like the way they move. Not like soldiers following orders, but like lovers completing each other's thoughts. A Spartan officer, magnificent in his bronze corselet and horsehair crested helmet, raises his spear to signal a charge. But before he can bring it down, a sacred band spear finds the gap beneath his arm. He falls without a sound, and the man behind him steps forward to take his place. But that man falls too, and the next, and the next. Here's what's happening, and why no one in Greek military history has ever seen anything like it. Treat the sacred band isn't just fighting harder than normal soldiers. They're fighting smarter. Each pair anticipates what the other will do, covers weaknesses, exploits opportunities with a coordination that makes them effectively unbeatable in single combat. A Spartan warrior, young, strong, perfectly trained, finds himself facing two lovers from Thebes. He's everything Sparta has spent 3 centuries creating: disciplined, fearless, technically flawless. In any normal circumstance, he could probably defeat both opponents. But these aren't normal circumstances. The older sacred band warrior feints high while his partner goes low. The Spartan blocks the feint, as his training demands, leaving himself open for a spear thrust that finds the gap at his hip. He staggers, tries to recover, but the lovers are already moving to their next target. Behind them, more sacred band pairs advance through the gap they've created. And behind them, rank after rank of the finest soldiers Thebes has ever produced, all concentrated into this single, irresistible point of attack. You realize you're watching the Spartan left wing disintegrate. Not collapse. Disintegrate, like a cloth that's been cut at exactly the right angle, so that pulling on one thread unravels everything. The sound of bronze on bronze mingles with something you don't expect. Laughter. Actual laughter from the sacred band as they advance through the collapsing Spartan formation. Not cruel laughter, but the joy of craftsmen whose art has proven itself perfect. A breeze picks up, carrying the dust of battle across the plain. For a moment, the sun is obscured, and everything takes on a dreamlike quality. Through the swirling dust, you see figures moving like heroes from an old story, larger than life, touched by something divine. Then the dust settles, and reality reasserts itself with brutal clarity. The Spartan left wing is gone, not retreating, gone. The survivors are scattered across the plain, some running, some standing in small groups with the stunned expression of men whose entire understanding of the world has just crumbled. But the real miracle is what happens next. Instead of pursuing the broken Spartans, the sacred band wheels right, like the head of a massive warhammer. They slam into the flank of the Spartan center, hitting troops who are still engaged with the Theban right wing and have no idea what's coming. Suddenly, the Spartans find themselves fighting on 2 fronts. Men who were pressing forward against the retreating Thebans now have enemies attacking them from the side. The perfect Spartan formation, that bronze hedgehog that's dominated battlefields for centuries, becomes a trap. You watch a Spartan officer realize what's happening. His face, visible through his helmet's bronze cheek guards, goes through a sequence of emotions that would be almost comical if they weren't so tragic: confusion, disbelief, recognition, terror. He opens his mouth to shout orders, but a sacred band spear finds his throat before the words emerge. The collapse spreads like water finding a crack in stone. One moment, the Spartan center is holding firm. The next, it's crumbling as men realize they're surrounded, outflanked, caught in a trap that was months in the making. A horn sounds, the Spartan signal for general retreat, but it's too late. The bronze hedgehog has become a bronze coffin, and the sacred band is hammering the lid shut with methodical precision. Through the dust and chaos, you catch glimpses of individual heroics that will be remembered as long as men tell stories of war. A sacred band pair, both wounded, supporting each other as they fight their way through a group of desperate Spartans. A young Theban, barely old enough to grow a beard, standing over his fallen lover's body and holding off 3 attackers until help arrives. And everywhere, the impossible sight of Spartans, running from a battlefield. The sun climbs higher, and the dust begins to settle again. The sounds of battle fade to scattered clashes as the last pockets of Spartan resistance are overwhelmed or escape into the hills. You find yourself sitting on a boulder, your legs suddenly too weak to support you. What you've just witnessed isn't just a military victory. It's the end of an era. The shattering of a myth that's shaped Greek politics for 3 centuries. Epaminondas appears beside you, his chiton torn and stained with dust, a shallow cut on his left arm that he seems not to have noticed. But his eyes are bright with something that goes beyond mere triumph. Well, he asks quietly. You try to find words for what you've seen. The systematic destruction of military perfection by tactical innovation. The proof that no advantage lasts forever. That every strength contains the seed of its own weakness. The world just changed, you finally manage. He nods, looking out over the battlefield where Theban soldiers are tending to the wounded and collecting the arms of the defeated. There's no celebration, no wild rejoicing, just the quiet satisfaction of men who've completed a difficult job well. Yes, he says simply, and we did it together. In the distance, a hawk circles lazily on the warming air. It calls once, a sound of pure wildness that cuts through the lingering smell of bronze and blood and sweat. Then it flies south, toward Sparta, carrying news that will shake the foundations of the Greek world. You're standing at the edge of Laconia in the winter of 370 BCE, watching something that no one has seen for over 2 centuries, a foreign army marching into Spartan territory. The morning frost crunches beneath your feet as you follow the Theban columns down from the mountain passes, and your breath makes small clouds in the cold air that mingles with the steam rising from thousands of men and animals. The landscape around you is austere and beautiful, exactly what you'd expect from the homeland of the Spartans. Rolling hills covered in scrub oak and wild olive trees, stone walls that speak of generations of careful cultivation, and everywhere the sense of a land that has bred hard men for hard times. But today, that land belongs to Thebes. A light snow began falling an hour ago, dusting the bronze helmets of the sacred band with white crystals that catch the pale sunlight like scattered diamonds. The men march in perfect silence. But there's an electric energy running through the column that has nothing to do with the cold. They're writing history with every step. You pull your woolen cloak tighter and marvel at how ordinary this moment feels, despite its revolutionary nature. The soldiers around you joke quietly, share water from leather skins, and complain about the weather exactly like any other army on any other march. It's only when you really look at their faces that you see the wonder lurking beneath the routine. These men know they're doing something their grandfathers would have called impossible. Epaminondas rides past on a sturdy mountain horse, and you catch his eye for a moment. He nods slightly, a gesture that somehow manages to convey both acknowledgement and invitation. You find yourself walking closer to his position, drawn by that particular gravity he seems to carry with him wherever he goes. A Theban scout appears from the woods ahead, his cloak thrown back despite the cold, excitement bright in his young face. He speaks quickly to Epaminondas in words too low for you to catch, but the general's response is clear enough. He smiles, not the grim smile of a warrior, but the delighted expression of someone whose deepest theories are being confirmed by reality. What news? You ask, unable to contain your curiosity. The Helots are rising, he says simply, and those 4 words contain more revolutionary potential than any battle cry you've ever heard. Here's what that means, and why it changes everything. For 3 centuries, Spartan power has rested on a foundation of enslaved labor. The Helots, the descendants of conquered peoples, outnumber the Spartans by at least 7 to 1. They farm the land, serve in the houses, and make it possible for Spartan citizens to spend their entire lives training for war. but they've never forgotten that they were once free. As you crest a small hill, you see the proof spread out in the valley below. Smoke rises from burning Spartan farms. But these aren't the random fires of destruction. These are the controlled burns of people reclaiming their own land. Groups of helots move purposefully across the landscape, and many of them are carrying weapons. Spears and shields taken from Spartan armories, or crude farm tools transformed into instruments of liberation. A delegation approaches from one of these groups. 3 men, their faces weathered by years of outdoor labor, their eyes bright with something between hope and disbelief. The eldest, his gray hair bound with a simple leather cord, speaks for all of them. "Lord Epaminondas," he says, and his voice trembles slightly. "Is it true? Are we really free?" The question hangs in the cold air like morning mist. Around you, the band soldiers have stopped to listen. Even the horses seem to sense the importance of this moment, standing quietly with their ears pricked forward. Epaminondas dismounts and walks over to the helot leader. For a moment, the 2 men simply look at each other, the Theban general in his bronze corselet and the former slave in his patched woolen tunic. Then Epaminondas does something that makes your throat tight with emotion. He embraces the older man like a brother. "You were always free," he says, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "We've just made it possible for you to remember." The transformation that follows is unlike anything you've ever witnessed. Helots begin emerging from hiding places you didn't even know existed, rocky overhangs, dense thickets, abandoned farmsteads. They come in 1s and 2s at first, then in larger groups, until the hillsides seem to bloom with people who have been invisible for generations. An old woman appears, leading a small girl by the hand. A group of young men, their muscles developed by years of hard labor, now carrying spears with the easy confidence of born warriors. Entire families, blinking in the sunlight like people emerging from caves. They've been waiting their entire lives for this moment. You watch as Theban soldiers share their rations with liberated helots, and something about the simple generosity of the gesture brings tears to your eyes. Barley, bread, and olive oil become symbols of a new world being born. One small act of kindness at a time. The march continues, but it's no longer just an army moving through enemy territory. It's become something approaching a festival of liberation. Helots join the column, some to fight, others simply to witness the moment when the old order finally crumbles. By midday, the snow has stopped and weak sunlight filters through breaking clouds. You can see Spartan settlements in the distance. Not cities, really, but clusters of simple buildings where the warrior class has lived its austere existence for centuries. They're empty. Not destroyed, just abandoned. Windows stare blindly at the approaching army, doors stand open to the winter air, and the only sounds are the wind and the distant bleating of goats that no one bothered to secure. Where are they? You ask a Theban officer walking beside you. He shrugs philosophically, retreating to more defensible positions. Or perhaps they've finally realized that you can't build a society entirely on the labor of people you've made into enemies. The observation is delivered without malice. Almost sadly, there's no hatred in this invasion, no desire for revenge. Just the inexorable logic of consequences finally catching up with choices made centuries ago. As afternoon fades toward evening, you crest another hill and see something that takes your breath away. Spread out in the valley below is the site where the new city of Messene will be built, a fortress capital for the liberated helots, positioned to guard the mountain passes and ensure that Spartan power can never again extend beyond its natural borders. The location is perfect, both strategically and symbolically, high enough to be defensible, with good water and fertile soil nearby, but also visible from far away. A stone declaration that the old world is gone and a new one is beginning. Epaminondas calls a halt and addresses the assembled army and the crowds of liberated helots who have joined them. His words are simple, delivered without theatrics or grand gestures. "We came here to ensure that Sparta could never again threaten the freedom of other Greeks," he says. "But we've discovered something more important. We've learned that freedom, once tasted, spreads like water finding its natural level. Around you, thousands of people nod in understanding. Former slaves stand beside Theban warriors, and for this moment at least, the distinctions that have defined their lives seem less important than the shared recognition that something fundamental has shifted. A cold wind stirs the grass at your feet, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and new possibilities. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls, not hawk this time, but something smaller and more cheerful, a finch perhaps, or a wren, the sound of ordinary life reasserting itself in extraordinary times. As darkness falls and cooking fires begin to dot the landscape, you realize you've been present at something rarer than any military victory. You've witnessed the moment when an idea becomes reality, when the impossible transforms into the inevitable. The Helots are free, Sparta's power is broken, and somewhere in the shadows cast by the firelight, you can almost see the outline of a future that no one could have imagined just a few years ago. Change, it turns out, is the most powerful force in the world, even more powerful than 3 centuries of tradition. You're standing on a windswept hilltop in Arcadia, watching thousands of workers shape stone and timber into something that has never existed before. The spring air of 369 BC carries the sound of hammers on chisels, the creak of wooden cranes, and the cheerful arguments of craftsmen debating the best way to build a dream made manifest. Below you, the city of Megalopolis is rising from the earth like a flower blooming in fast motion. The morning sun catches the limestone blocks being hauled up from quarries in the valley, each one perfectly cut and fitted to become part of walls that will stand for centuries. You can smell the sharp scent of fresh, cut pine from the forests to the north, where entire groves are being transformed into roof beams and scaffolding. But this isn't just construction. This is revolution in stone and mortar. A group of former Helots passes by, carrying water jugs to the work crews. Their faces are bright with purpose, and you notice how they walk differently now, not with the hunched shoulders of the enslaved, but with the straight backs of free citizens building their own future. One of them, a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and laugh lines around her eyes, pauses to offer you a drink from her jug. The water is cold and sweet, drawn from mountain springs that have never known the taste of bondage. My grandfather told me stories about the old days, she says, gesturing toward the rising walls. One Arcadia was free before the Spartans came. I never thought I'd live to see those days return. She moves on before you can respond, but her words linger in the morning air like incense at a shrine. You realize you're witnessing something that goes beyond mere urban planning. This is the physical manifestation of hope itself, stone by carefully placed stone. Epaminondas appears at your elbow, as he has a habit of doing. His chiton is dusty from walking among the work crews, and there are ink stains on his fingers from the endless stream of correspondence that flows between Thebes and its new allies. Impressive, isn't it? He says, following your gaze across the construction site. You nod, not trusting your voice. There's something almost magical about watching a city being born, especially one conceived not for conquest but for protection. Every wall that rises, every foundation that's laid, represents another nail in the coffin of Spartan hegemony. The Romans have a saying, Epaminondas continues, Ubs Eterna, the eternal city, but I think they have it backwards. Cities aren't eternal because they last forever. They're eternal because they represent human hope. And hope is the one thing that can never truly die. A crane creaks nearby as workers do a massive stone block into place. The block fits perfectly, with that satisfying solidity that speaks of master craftsmanship. Around the construction site, dozens of similar operations are taking place simultaneously, each one a small miracle of coordination and skill. You watch a group of Arcadian refugees, people who fled their homes when Sparta conquered their villages decades ago, directing the placement of stones with the careful attention of those who know they're building something that must last. Their children play among the construction materials, their laughter mixing with the sounds of labor to create a symphony of renewal. Here's what makes Megalopolis different from every other city you've ever seen. It's not being built to glorify a king or honor the gods, though it will certainly do both. It's being built as a living fortress, a place where free people can defend their freedom against anyone who would take it away. The city walls are massive, not just tall, but thick enough to resist any siege engine ever devised. But they're also beautiful, with decorative friezes that tell the story of Arcadian history in carved stone. Warriors and farmers, shepherds and craftsmen, all depicted with equal dignity as the builders of civilization. A delegation of architects approaches, their arms full of scrolls and their heads full of plans. They spread their drawings on a flat stone and begin discussing modifications to the theater district. You edge closer, fascinated by the complexity of their designs. The acoustics need to be perfect, one of them is saying. If we're going to build a city that celebrates freedom, people need to be able to hear freedom's voice from every seat. Another architect points to a section of the plans. And the marketplace needs to be large enough for all the surrounding communities. This isn't just Megalopolis. It's the commercial heart of a new Arcadia. You realize that what you're witnessing goes far beyond military strategy. This is social engineering on a scale that takes your breath away. By concentrating scattered Arcadian communities into a single, defensible city, Thebes is creating something unprecedented, a democracy strong enough to resist outside pressure while remaining true to its founding principles. The afternoon sun climbs higher, and work crews take shelter in the shade of partially completed buildings to eat their midday meal. The food is simple: bread, olive oil, cheese, wine mixed with water, but it's shared with the easy camaraderie of people united by common purpose. You accept an invitation to join one of these impromptu meals, finding yourself sitting cross-legged on the ground between a stone carver from Mantinea and a timber framer from Thebes. The conversation flows as freely as the wine, ranging from technical discussions of construction techniques to philosophical debates about the nature of freedom. "My father fought at Thermopylae," the stone carver says quietly, "not with the Spartans, against them. He was part of the Arcadian contingent that tried to stop them from marching north. But nobody remembers that part of the story." The timber framer nods understanding. History is written by the winners. But sometimes, if you're patient enough, you get a chance to write a new chapter. Around you, the sounds of construction continue. Hammers ring against chisels, saws bite through pine planks, and wooden wheels creak as carts bring fresh supplies from the surrounding countryside. But underneath these working sounds, you hear something else is singing. It's not a work song or a military marching tune, but something softer and more personal, a lullaby maybe, or a love song. The kind of music that springs spontaneously from hearts too full of happiness to remain silent. As the meal ends and work resumes, you climb to a higher vantage point to better appreciate the scope of what's being accomplished. From here, you can see the entire city taking shape according to a master plan that balances practical needs with aesthetic beauty. The streets are laid out in a grid pattern that will make navigation easy, but the grid is softened by public squares and small parks where citizens can gather for markets or festivals. The residential districts are mixed, rich and poor living side by side, because shared citizenship is more important than economic status. And everywhere the construction continues at a pace that seems almost supernatural. By some estimates, Megalopolis will be substantially complete within 2 years, a time frame that would be impossible without the enthusiasm of people who know they're building their own freedom. A messenger arrives as the sun begins its descent toward evening. He speaks briefly with Epaminondas, who nods and sends him on his way with fresh instructions. You catch enough of the conversation to understand that similar projects are underway throughout the region. Fortress cities, defensive alliances, trade agreements that bind former enemies together through mutual prosperity. Thebes isn't just defeating Sparta, it's replacing the entire system that made Spartan domination possible. As twilight approaches and the work crews begin to disperse for the day, you take one last look at the rising city. Tomorrow, There will be more stones laid, more walls raised, more dreams made manifest in timber and bronze and marble. But tonight, there's something almost magical about the way the evening light catches the unfinished buildings, making them glow like a vision of the future struggling to be born. Change isn't just coming to the Greek world. It's already here, taking physical form in every perfectly fitted stone, every carefully planned street, every public space designed for citizens rather than subjects. And somewhere in that forest of scaffolding and half-built walls, the future is learning to walk. You're riding north through the mountain passes of Thessaly in the autumn of 368 BCE, the crisp air filling your lungs as your horse picks its way carefully along paths that wind between peaks crowned with early snow. The leather of your saddle creaks rhythmically, and somewhere ahead, you can hear the distant sound of the Theban army making its way through these wild borderlands. The landscape here is different from the gentle hills of Boeotia or the austere beauty of Laconia. Thessaly is raw, untamed, a place where civilization feels like a recent and somewhat uncertain development. Eagles circle overhead, riding thermals that rise from valleys so deep you can't see their bottoms. But it's precisely this wildness that makes Thessaly so important. Control these passes, and you control the route between southern Greece and the growing power of Macedonia to the north. Your horse snorts and shakes its head, ears pricked forward at some sound you can't detect. You lean forward in the saddle, peering through the pine trees that line the narrow trail, and catch a glimpse of bronze reflecting sunlight from somewhere up ahead. The sacred band is moving through these mountains like bronze ghosts, their formations adapted to the terrain, but their discipline as perfect as ever. You've watched them march through summer heat and winter cold, across plains and through forests, and their unity never wavers. But today, there's tension in the air that has nothing to do with the weather. A scout appears from the woods ahead, his cloak thrown back despite the mountain chill. He speaks quickly to the officer leading your section of the column, gesturing toward the north with barely contained excitement. "What news?" you ask, guiding your horse closer. "The Thessalians want to talk," the officer replies. "Their cavalry commanders are waiting at the next valley. Seems they've heard what we did to the Spartans and decided they'd rather be allies than enemies." You nod, understanding the logic. Thessalian cavalry is legendary throughout Greece, fast, skilled, and deadly in open terrain. But even the finest horses and riders are vulnerable to well-organized infantry using innovative tactics. Better to negotiate from a position of strength than test those tactics personally. The trail descends into a broad valley where a stream runs clear and cold over polished stones. Here, the Theban army has made a temporary camp, and you can see the colorful pavilions of Thessalian nobles dotting the opposite bank like exotic flowers. Epaminondas stands near the stream's edge, his simple chiton and practical manner contrasting sharply with the elaborate dress of the Thessalian delegation. But there's something about his presence that makes even these proud northern lords treat him as an equal. You dismount and walk closer. Close enough to hear the negotiations, but far enough away to avoid seeming intrusive. The conversation is conducted in the formal language of diplomacy, but underneath the courtly phrases, you can sense the real emotions at play. Fear, respect, and something approaching up. "Lord Epaminondas," the lead Thessalian is saying, "we have heard remarkable stories from the south. They say you defeated the Spartans not once, but twice, that you freed the Helots and built new cities where none existed before." Epaminondas inclines his head slightly. Victory in battle is temporary. Victory over injustice, that has the potential to be eternal. The Thessalian delegates exchange glances. These are practical men, lords who have spent their lives navigating the complex politics of northern Greece. But they're trying to evaluate something they've never encountered before. A general who seems more interested in philosophy than plunder. A cool breeze stirs the grass at your feet, carrying with it the scent of wild herbs and distant snow. Somewhere upstream, a kingfisher calls, that liquid note that always makes you think of clear water and peaceful mornings. But peace, you're beginning to understand, is something that must be constantly defended. There are complications in our region, another Thessalian says carefully. The Macedonians grow stronger under their new king, Philip they call him, young, ambitious, and reportedly quite clever. At the mention of Macedonia, you see Epaminondas' expression sharpen slightly. This is the first time you've heard him express concern about any external threat, and the change in his demeanor sends a chill down your spine that has nothing to do with the mountain air. Tell me about this Philip, he says quietly. A hostage in Thebes for 3 years during his youth, the Thessalian replies. He learned Greek military tactics, studied under your best teachers. Some say he was particularly interested in your innovations. The implications hang in the mountain air like morning mist. Philip of Macedon learned Theban tactics as a hostage, then returned north to a kingdom with unlimited manpower and resources. If he's as clever as the Thessalians suggest, he represents a threat that could dwarf anything Sparta ever posed. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today's challenge is more immediate. The negotiations continue throughout the afternoon, conducted with the elaborate courtesy that characterizes Greek diplomacy. Maps are spread on camp tables, territorial boundaries are discussed, and trade agreements are outlined with careful attention to detail. But underneath all the formal language, you sense something more primal at work. These Thessalian lords are choosing sides in a conflict that will reshape the entire Greek world. And they're choosing Thebes not because they love freedom or democracy, but because they respect power and want to be on the winning side. As evening approaches, an agreement is reached. Thessaly will provide cavalry support for Theban operations in the north, while Thebes will guarantee Thessalian independence against Macedonian expansion. Hands are clasped, toasts are drunk, and everyone pretends that alliances based on mutual necessity are the same as friendships based on shared values. You walk to the edge of the camp as the sun sets behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seem almost too beautiful for this harsh landscape. The stream gurgles softly over its rocky bed, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the evening songs of birds settling in for the night. A figure approaches through the gathering darkness. Epaminondas, walking with that measured pace that suggests deep thought. He stops beside you, following your gaze toward the northern passes where Macedonia lies hidden beyond the mountains. Troubled thoughts, you ask. Prophetic ones. Perhaps, he replies, we've achieved everything we set out to accomplish. Sparta is contained, the Helots are freed, new cities guard the mountain passes, but success, I'm learning, creates its own problems. He picks up a smooth stone from the stream bank and turns it over in his hands, as if searching for answers in its polished surface. Power abhors a vacuum, he continues. When you remove one threat, something else inevitably moves to fill the empty space. The question is whether that something else will be better or worse than what came before. The stone arcs through the air and splashes into the stream with a sound that seems oddly final. Ripples spread outward, disturbing the perfect reflection of stars that have begun to appear in the darkening sky. At least we've given freedom a chance to take root, you offer Wes. He agrees, but his voice carries a note of uncertainty that you've never heard before. The question is whether we've given it enough time to grow strong. Above you, the stars shine with that peculiar brilliance that comes only in mountain air. The same constellations that have guided Greek travelers for centuries, unchanged and eternal despite all the human drama playing out beneath them. But even stars, you realize, eventually burn out and die. Nothing lasts forever, no matter how bright it burns or how essential it seems. The thought should be depressing, but somehow it isn't. Perhaps because you've learned that the temporary nature of all things makes them more precious, not less. More worthy of the effort required to create and protect them. In the distance, a wolf howls, wild, lonely, beautiful. The sound echoes off the mountain walls before fading into silence, leaving only the gentle murmur of the stream and the whisper of wind through pine branches. Change is coming again. You can feel it in the mountain air. See it in the worried glances that pass between even the most confident commanders. But for now, tonight, there's still time to appreciate what has been accomplished. Still time to hope that tomorrow's challenges will find tomorrow's heroes ready to meet them. The northern campaign continues, one careful alliance at a time. You're standing on the plain of Mantinea in the scorching heat of July 4th, 362 BCE, watching the final act of a drama that began 8 years ago with a dream of Theban greatness. The sun beats down mercilessly, turning bronze armor into furnaces and making the air shimmer like water above the dusty ground. But today's heat has nothing on the fire burning in the eyes of the men around you. The sacred band stands in perfect formation, their bronze gleaming despite that coats everything else on this battlefield. They're older now. Some show gray in their beards. Others bear scars from a decade of campaigns, but their unity remains as strong as ever. Love, you've learned, ages like fine wine. A hawk circles overhead, riding the thermals that rise from the sun-baked earth. Its cry cuts through the pre-battle tension like a knife, and you remember all the other battlefields where similar birds have marked similar moments. There's something eternal about these creatures of war, as if they've been witnesses to human conflict since time began. Epaminondas moves among the troops with that calm presence that has become legendary throughout Greece. He's past 50 now, his dark hair showing silver at the temples, but his step remains sure and his voice carries the quiet authority of a man who has never lost a major battle. You notice how the soldiers respond to his presence, not with the rigid discipline of fear, but with the relaxed confidence that comes from absolute trust. These men would follow him into Hades itself if he asked them to. And today, he might be asking exactly that. The enemy coalition spread across the opposite side of the plain is the largest force ever assembled against Thebes. Spartans seeking revenge for their humiliation. Athenians worried about Theban expansion. Mantineans fighting for their own independence. Mercenaries from across the Mediterranean drawn by the promise of rich payment. 30,000 men united by nothing more than their desire to see Theban power broken forever. A cool breeze stirs the dust at your feet, carrying with it the scent of wild thyme and something else. That particular smell that seems to hang in the air before great events unfold. You've learned to recognize it over the years, this electric tension that makes ordinary moments feel heavy with destiny. "One last dance," says a voice beside you. You turn to see one of the sacred band veterans, his face weathered by years of campaigning, but his eyes bright with anticipation. His lover stands next to him, younger but equally scarred, their shields touching in that subtle gesture of solidarity you've come to recognize. They're not afraid. If anything, they seem almost eager for what's coming. Not because they're bloodthirsty. You've never met more gentle men in times of peace. But because they know this battle will determine whether everything they've fought for survives or dies. The horn sounds low and mournful in the still air. Time to begin. You watch as the Theban formation takes shape for what everyone knows will be Epaminondas' final masterpiece. The oblique attack formation, refined and perfected through years of experience. The sacred band and elite troops massed 50 deep on the left wing. The right wing held back, ready to retreat in good order while the decisive blow is delivered elsewhere. But there's something different this time. Something in the way Epaminondas positions himself that makes your heart skip a beat. He's not taking his usual command position behind the lines. He's placing himself at the very point of the attack, in the front rank of the sacred band, where the fighting will be most intense. A murmur runs through the army as soldiers realize what their general is planning. Not alarm. These men trust his judgment too completely for that, but a kind of odd recognition that they're about to witness something extraordinary. The final charge begins with that eerie silence that characterizes all great military movements. 30,000 feet moving in perfect coordination, bronze glinting in the afternoon sun, dust rising in clouds that obscure the sky. Then the collision. You've witnessed battles before, but nothing has prepared you for the violence of this impact. The sound alone, bronze on bronze, wood splintering, men shouting in pain and triumph, is like thunder that goes on and on without stopping. But through the chaos, you can see the familiar pattern emerging. The Theban right wing gives ground in good order, drawing the enemy forward. The center holds firm, and on the left, the concentrated weight of Theban excellence begins its inexorable advance. The sacred band moves like a bronze spear point, cutting through enemy formations with surgical precision. You watch pairs of lovers working in perfect harmony, each anticipating the other's moves, covering weaknesses, exploiting opportunities with a coordination that makes them effectively unbeatable. Behind them, rank after rank of elite Theban infantry maintains the pressure. They've learned their lessons well over the years. When to advance, when to pause, when to let their enemies make the mistakes that will cost them everything. But something's wrong. Through the dust and confusion, you can see that the enemy coalition isn't breaking as quickly as usual. The Spartans, fighting for their very survival, have found reserves of courage that seemed exhausted years ago. The Athenians are proving that their reputation for cleverness extends to battlefield tactics. The mercenaries are earning their pay with professional competence. This isn't going to be another Leuctra, where Spartan certainty crumbled at the first sign of the impossible. This is going to be a grinding, brutal affair where victory goes to whoever can endure the most pain. And in the midst of that grinding brutality, Epaminondas is pushing forward with the desperate urgency of a man who knows this is his last chance to secure everything he's worked for. You see him in the front rank, his bronze corselet flashing as he strikes down one opponent after another. His presence alone seems to energize the sacred band, who fight with an intensity that borders on the supernatural. Then, just as victory seems within reach, disaster strikes with the suddenness of lightning. An enemy spear, thrown by a dying Spartan in one last act of defiance, finds the gap beneath Epaminondas' arm where his corselet doesn't quite meet his shoulder guard. The bronze point punches through bronze rings and into flesh with a sound that somehow carries across the entire battlefield. He staggers but doesn't fall. For a heartbeat, it seems like the wound isn't serious. Then you see the blood beginning to flow, bright red against bronze, and your heart stops. The sacred band sees it too. Their response is immediate and terrible, a surge of fury that sweeps away everything in front of them like a bronze tsunami. The enemy line finally breaks, not gradually but all at once, as if the sight of their greatest enemy's mortality has suddenly made victory seem possible. But it's too late for the man who made it all happen. You fight your way through the chaos to where Epaminondas has been carried, his life ebbing away drop by precious drop onto the dusty ground. His face is pale but peaceful, and when he sees you approaching, he manages a weak smile. "Did we win?" he asks quietly. Around you, the sounds of pursuit echo across the plain as the band forces chase the scattered remnants of the coalition army. Victory banners are being raised, wounded are being tended, and the business of triumph proceeds with grim efficiency. "Yes, Utah won." He nods once, closes his eyes, and lets out a long breath that seems to carry with it all the weight of 8 years' worth of campaigns, innovations, and dreams made manifest. Then he's gone, and with him dies the brief, brilliant moment when Thebes stood at the center of the Greek world. The sun is setting now, painting the battlefield in shades of gold and crimson that seem appropriate for the end of an era. Somewhere in the distance, that hawk calls again, its cry somehow both mournful and eternal. Victory and defeat, you realize, are sometimes the same thing, separated only by the length of perspective you choose to apply. You're walking through the streets of Thebes in the gray autumn of 361 BCE, 3 months after Mantinea, and everything feels different. The stones beneath your feet are the same. The familiar scent of baking bread still drifts from the shops. But there's a hollowness in the air that wasn't there before. Like a house where laughter used to live, but doesn't anymore. The sacred band still trains in the gymnasium, their formations as precise as ever. But when you watch them now, you notice the small hesitations, the moments where pairs glance toward the spot where their general used to stand. Leadership, you're learning, isn't something that can simply be transferred from one man to another like a cloak or a sword. A light rain begins to fall as you make your way toward the agora, droplets catching the pale sunlight and turning the limestone buildings into something that shimmers like a mirage. The weather matches the city's mood, not stormy enough to be dramatic, just persistently melancholy in that way that seeps into your bones. At the central fountain, women gather to fill their water jugs as they have for generations. But their conversations are different now. Instead of news about victories and expanding alliances, they whisper about problems that seem to multiply faster than solutions can be found. The Arcadians are fighting among themselves again, one of them says, her voice carrying the wary tone of someone who's heard this story too many times. Megalopolis wants to lead the Federation, but the smaller cities think they're getting too powerful. Another woman nods knowingly. My cousin in Mantinia says the Athenians are sending gold to anyone willing to cause trouble for us. Not enough to start a real war, but enough to keep things complicated. Complicated. That word has become the theme of Theban foreign policy since Epaminondas died. Where once there were clear objectives and innovative solutions, now there are endless committees, heated debates, and the kind of cautious half-measures that satisfy no one. You continue walking, past shops where merchants haggle over prices with less enthusiasm than they used to show, past the gymnasium where young men train for a kind of warfare that may already be obsolete, past the council building where middle-aged politicians argue about problems that have no good answers. The city is still prosperous, still powerful by any reasonable measure, but prosperity without purpose feels strangely empty, like a beautifully furnished house with no one living in it. A cat darts across your path, pausing to look back at you with those inscrutable yellow eyes before disappearing into an alley. You find yourself envying its simplicity. Cats don't worry about geopolitics or the burden of inherited greatness. At the edge of the city, you climb the walls to get a better view of the surrounding countryside. The fields are still productive, the roads still busy with traders. The smaller settlements still look to Thebes for leadership and protection. From this distance, everything appears normal, but you know better. You've heard the reports from Thessaly, where the alliance is fraying as local lords decide that distant friendship is less valuable than immediate profit. You've seen the messages from the south, where Sparta, broken but not destroyed, is slowly rebuilding its strength and looking for opportunities to reclaim what it lost. And most ominously, you've heard the stories from the north, where a young Macedonian king named Philip is transforming his barbarous kingdom into something that makes seasoned diplomats wake up in cold sweats. A merchant caravan approaches the city gates, their pack animals loaded with goods from across the Mediterranean. You watch the guards examine their cargo with practiced efficiency, collecting taxes that will fund the armies and public works that maintain Theban hegemony. But even this routine procedure carries undertones of uncertainty. The guards are more thorough than they used to be, checking not just for contraband but for signs of political intelligence, letters hidden in grain sacks, maps concealed in pottery, the small tools of espionage that flow like water whenever great powers begin to eye each other with suspicion. One of the guards, a veteran you recognize from the Mantinia campaign, nods as you approach. His left arm hangs slightly stiff, souvenir from that terrible day, but his eyes remain alert. Quiet afternoon, you comment. He shrugs philosophically. The quiet ones make me more nervous than the busy ones. At least when people are making noise, you know what they're thinking about. The observation carries more weight than its casual delivery suggests. Throughout the Greek world, there's a sense of waiting, of great forces gathering momentum in the shadows. Everyone knows that the current balance of power can't last forever, but no one knows what will replace it. As evening approaches, you make your way to a small tavern near the Potter's Quarter, where veterans gather to drink wine and argue about military tactics. The conversation tonight, as always, eventually turns to the question that haunts everyone who cares about Theban power. "We need another Epaminondas," declares a former cavalry officer, his voice thick with wine and nostalgia. "Someone who can see the big picture, make the hard choices. You can't just create genius," replies a Sacred Band veteran quietly. "It either exists or it doesn't, and when it's gone..." He doesn't finish the sentence, but everyone understands what he means. The silence that follows is broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of rain beginning to fall harder against the shuttered windows. Outside, the city settles into evening routine. Shops closing, families gathering for dinner, children being called in from their games. Life goes on, as it always does. But beneath the surface of routine, you can feel the current of uncertainty that runs through everything like underground river. A young soldier, barely old enough to shave, speaks up hesitantly. "Maybe we don't need another Epaminondas. Maybe we need something different, something new." The older men smile tolerantly at his naivety, but you catch something in his words that makes you think. Perhaps the future doesn't require repeating the past. Perhaps it requires learning from the past while having the courage to imagine alternatives that no one has tried before. But imagination, like genius, can't be summoned on command. It emerges from the mysterious intersection of necessity, opportunity, and the kind of individual brilliance that appears perhaps once in a generation. If it appears at all, the rain continues to fall, drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. Through the windows, you can see people hurrying through the streets with their cloaks pulled tight, heads down against the weather. It occurs to you that this is what the end of a golden age looks like. Not a dramatic collapse or a sudden catastrophe, but a gradual fading of the light that once made everything seem possible. Thebes is still strong, still influential, still capable of defending its interests and protecting its allies. But the moment when it seemed destined to reshape the entire Greek world has passed, slipping away like water through fingers no matter how tightly you try to hold it. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that greatness can survive the loss of great men. But tonight, in this small tavern filled with veterans who remember when the world trembled at the approach of Theban spears, there's only the rain and the wine and the bittersweet knowledge that some moments can never be recaptured. The giant is still awake, but it's learning to walk more carefully through a world that no longer seems quite so eager to follow where it leads. You're standing on the walls of Pella in the spring of 356 BCE, looking down at something that should terrify anyone who cares about the future of southern Greece. Below you, in the broad courtyard of the Macedonian royal palace, 8,000 men move in perfect formation under the watchful eye of their 26-year-old king. But these aren't the wild tribesmen that Greece has always dismissed as barely civilized barbarians. These are soldiers trained in Theban tactics, armed with innovations that make traditional Greek warfare look suddenly obsolete, and led by a man who learned his craft as a teenage hostage in the very city he's now preparing to surpass. Philip of Macedon doesn't look like world conquest. He's shorter than you expected, with a slight limp from an old war wound and an eye patch that gives him a rakish, almost piratical appearance. But when he speaks, his voice carries the kind of quiet authority that makes even proud Macedonian nobles listen carefully. And when he looks at his army, you can see the future taking shape in his dark eyes. 16 feet, he's saying to a group of officers, gesturing toward the forest of spear points that stretches across the training ground. Each pike is 16 feet long, held by men trained to move as one organism. Tell me, how does a traditional phalanx get close enough to fight when it's facing that? The question hangs in the morning air like incense at a shrine. You know the answer because you've watched these drills for weeks now, studying the tactical revolution that's unfolding in this northern kingdom while the rest of Greece argues about yesterday's problems. The traditional phalanx can't get close enough to fight, not against this. Philip calls his innovation the sarissa, a pike so long it turns infantry into a bronze hedgehog that can kill enemies before they're close enough to strike back. But the real genius isn't in the weapon itself. It's in the system Philip has built around it. Watch how his men move, and you'll see something that didn't exist when Epaminondas was alive. These soldiers aren't citizen farmers who train part-time between harvests. They're professionals, paid year-round to perfect their craft, equipped with standardized weapons and armor, drilled until their responses become automatic. A horn sounds, and the phalanx begins to advance across the practice field. 8,000 men moving as one, their sarissas angled forward like the quills of some enormous, deadly porcupine. The sound of their synchronized footsteps echoes off the palace walls with the rhythm of inevitability. You think about the sacred band, still training in their gymnasium in Thebes, still magnificent, still undefeated, still operating on the assumption that 200 years of tactical innovation ended with Epaminondas. They have no idea what's coming for them. None of the southern Greeks do. A messenger arrives, dusty from hard riding, and speaks quietly to Philip. The king listens without expression, nods once, and dismisses the man with casual efficiency. But you catch the slight smile that plays at the corners of his mouth, and you suspect the news was good, for Philip at least. Problems in the south, you ask carefully. You're here as an unofficial observer, a Greek scholar studying northern military innovations, but Philip has been surprisingly willing to let you watch his preparations. The Phocians have seized the oracle at Delphi, he replies casually, as if discussing the weather. They're using the temple treasury to hire mercenaries for their war against Thebes. Very unfortunate. The word hangs between you, loaded with implication. The sacred war, that's what people are calling this new conflict, gives Philip exactly the excuse he needs to intervene in southern Greek affairs. As a defender of religious propriety, naturally, a protector of sacred sites against sacrilege, the fact that such intervention will also advance Macedonian interests is purely coincidental. You watch a cavalry unit practicing charges against mock infantry formations. These aren't the light skirmishers that most Greek states use for scouting and harassment. These are heavy cavalry, men and horses armored in bronze, trained to punch through enemy lines like hammers through papyrus. Philip calls them his companions, and they're recruited from the Macedonian nobility. Young men raised from childhood to ride and fight, bound to their king by ties of personal loyalty that go deeper than mere military discipline. Looking at them, you understand something that the southern Greeks haven't grasped yet. Philip isn't just building an army. He's creating an entirely new kind of military organization, one that combines the tactical innovations of Thebes with the resources base of a unified kingdom and the driving ambition of a man who sees the whole Greek world as his natural inheritance. The training exercise concludes, and the troops disperse with the casual efficiency of men who have practiced these maneuvers 1,000 times. But you notice how they don't really disperse. Small groups cluster around veteran sergeants, discussing techniques and sharing equipment maintenance tips. Even their rest periods are educational. Philip approaches, limping slightly but moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his presence command attention. Up close, you can see the intelligence that burns behind his remaining eye, the calculating mind that has already figured out how to turn every southern Greek weakness into northern opportunity. Impressive. You manage, gesturing toward the training ground. Necessary, he corrects gently. The world is changing, and those who don't change with it get swept aside. Your southern friends are still fighting the last war, while I prepare for the next one. A cool breeze stirs the dust at your feet, carrying with it the scent of pine forests and distant snow-capped peaks. This is still Macedonia, still the frontier between civilization and barbarism. But that frontier is moving south faster than anyone realizes. The Thebans were my teachers, Philip continues, and there's something almost fond in his voice. Epaminondas, Pelopidas, the sacred band. They showed the world that innovation could triumph over tradition, but they made one crucial mistake. Which was, they assumed their innovations would remain innovations forever. They never considered what would happen when someone took their ideas and improved upon them. The implications send a chill down your spine that has nothing to do with the mountain air. Philip learned Theban tactics as a hostage, then returned home to a kingdom with unlimited manpower and resources. Now he's applied systematic thinking to military organization in ways that make even Epaminondas' genius look limited by comparison. As afternoon fades toward evening, you climb to the highest tower of the palace for one last look at what Macedonia has become under Philip's leadership. The view stretches for miles in every direction. Fertile valleys dotted with prosperous towns, mountain passes guarded by strong fortresses, and everywhere the signs of a kingdom that has found its purpose. To the south, beyond the visible horizon, lies the quarrelsome collection of city-states that still thinks of Macedonia as a backward tribal kingdom. They have no idea that their entire way of life is about to become obsolete, swept aside by the same kind of systematic innovation that once made Thebes great. The sun sets behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seem almost prophetic. Somewhere in that forest of peaks and valleys, the future is gathering strength for the day when it will march south and change everything. Philip joins you on the tower as the first stars appear in the darkening sky. For a moment, the two of you stand in comfortable silence, watching the lights begin to twinkle in the town below. Change is the only constant, he says finally, echoing something Epaminondas might have said years ago in a different context. The question isn't whether it will come, but whether you'll be ready for it when it arrives. In the distance, a wolf howls. Wild, lonely, beautiful. The sound echoes off the mountain walls before fading into silence, leaving only the whisper of wind through pine branches and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the world one day closer to a reckoning that few people see coming. But Philip sees it, and he's ready. You're standing on the battlefield of Chaeronea in the gray dawn of August Sin, 338 BCE, watching 150 pairs of lovers prepare for their final dance. The morning mist clings to the ground like the breath of sleeping gods, and somewhere in the distance, a lark sings with liquid joy, oblivious to the tragedy about to unfold. The sacred band has aged well over the decades. Many of the original members are gone now, fallen in countless skirmishes, retired to tend olive groves, or simply claimed by time. But their replacements carry the same quiet dignity, the same unbreakable bonds that have made this unit legendary throughout the Greek world. Today, those bonds will be tested as never before. You pull your Haematian closer against the morning chill and watch as the last great phalanx in Greek history takes its position. These men know what they're facing. Philip's Macedonians aren't just another enemy army. They're the future of warfare made manifest in bronze and steel and systematic thinking. But the sacred band has never retreated from a battlefield. Today won't be the first time. The mist begins to lift, revealing the full scope of the forces arrayed against Thebes and its Athenian allies. 30,000 Macedonians spread across the plain in formations that look like nothing you've ever seen before. The Sarissa phalanx in the center, their 16-foot pikes creating a forest of death. Heavy cavalry on the flanks, armored like moving fortresses. Archers and slingers positioned to rain death from a distance. And commanding it all, a one-eyed king who learned his craft in Theban gymnasiums and now prepares to demonstrate how thoroughly he's surpassed his teachers. But the most unsettling sight is on the Macedonian right wing, where an 18-year-old prince named Alexander sits his horse with the casual confidence of someone who's never lost a battle. There's something about the way he holds himself, perfectly still but coiled like a spring, that suggests violence barely contained. The future, you realize, has a name and a face, and both belong to Macedonia. A horn sounds across the plain, low and mournful as a funeral dirge. The Theban advance begins with that eerie precision you've come to associate with doomed heroism. 12,000 men moving in perfect coordination, their bronze armor catching the strengthening sunlight like scattered coins. But they're outnumbered 3-1. facing an enemy that's had 20 years to perfect innovations that make traditional Greek warfare obsolete. Courage alone won't be enough today. You watch as the first collision occurs on the right wing, where Athenian hoplites crash into the Macedonian left with a sound like bronze thunder. For a moment, it seems like the old ways might triumph. Greek spears finding gaps in Macedonian armor, experience overcoming innovation through sheer determination. Then Philip's trap springs shut. The Macedonian left doesn't just hold against the Athenian charge. It gives ground slowly, drawing the attackers forward into a carefully prepared killing ground. Meanwhile, young Alexander leads his companion cavalry in a flanking maneuver that turns the Athenian right into chaos. You've seen this pattern before, in a different place and time. It's the oblique attack that Epaminondas perfected, refined by 20 years of systematic improvement and applied with surgical precision. The student has become the master. But your attention is drawn irresistibly to the center, where the sacred band faces the massed sarissas of the Macedonian phalanx. 150 pairs of lovers against thousands of professional soldiers armed with weapons specifically designed to kill phalangites before they can strike back. The mathematics are brutal and inescapable. A gentle breeze stirs the grass at your feet, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and something else. That metallic smell that seems to precede great violence. Around you, other observers watch in stunned silence as the last act of classical Greek warfare unfolds with inexorable logic. The sacred band advances steadily, their shields locked and spears leveled, moving with that fluid coordination that has made them legendary. But the Macedonian sarissas are simply too long. Every time a sacred band warrior tries to close with his opponent, he faces not one spear point but 3 or 4, thrust by men standing safely beyond the reach of his own weapon. It's like watching masters of swordplay trying to fight archers, or cavalry charging a stone wall. Courage becomes irrelevant when the fundamental conditions of combat have changed. But they don't break. That's what makes this scene so heartbreaking and so magnificent. Lesser men would recognize the futility and retreat to fight another day. The sacred band simply adjusts their formation and continues forward, step by bloody step, into the bronze forest that's killing them. You see one pair, an older warrior with gray in his beard and his young lover fighting beside him, break through the sarissa wall through sheer determination and skill. For a moment, they're actually winning, their short swords finding gaps in Macedonian armor with deadly precision. Then more sarissas swing toward them from adjacent files, and both men disappear beneath a thicket of bronze points. They die together, as they've lived together, their shields touching even in death. The sight hits you like a physical blow. These aren't just soldiers falling. These are lovers, friends, men who've shared breakfast and laughter and quiet conversations about philosophy and war. Each death is both individual tragedy and communal loss. But still they don't break. The morning sun climbs higher, burning away the last wisps of mist and revealing the full extent of the disaster unfolding across the plain. The Athenians are in full retreat now, streaming away from the battlefield in the kind of panicked rout that destroys armies permanently. The Theban allies are wavering, looking for opportunities to extract themselves from what's clearly becoming a massacre. Only the sacred band holds firm, fighting with the desperate magnificence of men who know they're witnessing the end of everything they've spent their lives protecting. A Macedonian officer, young, competent, probably educated in Athens, rides close enough to the fighting to shout an offer of surrender. His words carry clearly in the morning air, delivered in accent-free Greek that marks him as one of the new breed of cosmopolitan warriors Philip has created. The sacred band's response is wordless but unmistakable. They close ranks and continue fighting, their movements slower now but still perfectly coordinated. Love, it seems, has its own logic that transcends military tactics and political realism. You realize you're witnessing something that will be remembered long after the specific details of this battle are forgotten. Not just the death of a military unit, but the end of an entire way of thinking about war and honor and the bonds between men. As the sun reaches its zenith, the last pocket of resistance finally falls silent. 150 pairs of lovers lie where they fought, their bodies arranged in the rough circle they maintained, even as the Macedonian sarissas closed around them like the jaws of some bronze beast. Philip himself rides across the battlefield to survey his victory, and you watch his face as he looks down at the sacred band's final position. There's no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction at having defeated a legendary enemy, just a kind of sad recognition that something irreplaceable has been lost forever. "They're all here," reports one of his officers, his voice hushed with something approaching reverence. "Every single one of them. Not one man fled." Philip dismounts and walks among the fallen, his limp more pronounced now, whether from old wounds or the weight of what he's accomplished. When he speaks, his words carry across the silent battlefield with the clarity of prophecy. "Let no man say these warriors were not brave. They died as they lived, together unbroken, faithful to each other until the very end." He pauses beside one particular pair, two young men whose hands still reach toward each other across the small space that separates their bodies. "This is what we've defeated today. Not just an army, but an ideal. Love made manifest in bronze and courage." A hawk calls from somewhere overhead, its cry seeming to carry both mourning and celebration. The old world is ending, but something new is being born from its ashes. Whether that something will be better or worse remains to be seen. But standing here among the fallen heroes, surrounded by the evidence of innovation's triumph over tradition, you know that nothing will ever be the same again. The sacred band is gone, and with it dies the last echo of Theban greatness, the final chapter in a story that began with dreams of liberation and ends with the mathematics of superior military organization. Change, as always, is the only constant, and change today wears Macedonian colors. You're walking through the ruins of Thebes on a cold December morning in 335 BCE, and the silence is so complete it makes your footsteps sound like thunder. 3 years have passed since Cherone, and the city that once challenged Sparta and freed the Helots now exists only as a monument to the consequences of defying Macedonian power. The smell of burned stone still lingers in the air, mixed with the winter scent of dead leaves and the particular emptiness that haunts places where life used to flourish. A few scattered walls stand like broken teeth against the gray sky, but most of what you remember as the greatest city in Boeotia has been reduced to rubble and weeds. Alexander's revenge was thorough. You pick your way carefully through what used to be the agora, stepping over fallen columns and chunks of masonry that once formed the council building where Epaminondas planned his campaigns. Somewhere beneath your feet lie the foundations of shops where merchants sold goods from across the Mediterranean, of homes where families shared simple meals and complex dreams. All gone now, swept away in 6 days of systematic destruction that was meant to send a message to anyone else who might consider resisting Macedonian rule. The message was received. A cat appears from behind a collapsed wall, thin, wary, but somehow still alive in this devastation. It watches you with yellow eyes that seem to hold reproach, as if you're personally responsible for the transformation of its world into a wasteland. Then it disappears again, padding silently through the ruins on some private mission that doesn't concern the living. You continue walking toward what used to be the gymnasium, where the sacred band trained for their final battle. The building is gone, of course. Alexander's engineers were nothing if not thorough, but you can still make out the rectangular depression where the practice ground once echoed with the sounds of lovers learning to kill together. Here's what happened after Cheronia, in case anyone still cares about the details. Philip tried to rule Greece with a light hand, incorporating the southern city-states into his planned war against Persia, while allowing them to maintain their traditional institutions. It might have worked, given time and patience, but Philip was assassinated by a disgruntled bodyguard in 336 BCE, and his 20-year-old son inherited both the Macedonian throne and a Greek world that mistook youth for weakness. The Thebans rose in revolt, declaring that Macedonia's power died with Philip. Other cities watched to see which way the wind would blow, ready to join the rebellion if it showed signs of success. Alexander's response was swift, brutal, and definitive. A winter wind stirs the rubble at your feet, uncovering a fragment of pottery that might once have held olive oil or wine or any of the thousand simple substances that make civilization possible. You pick it up, feeling the smooth glaze against your palm, then set it carefully on a broken wall where someone else might notice it. Small gestures of remembrance in a place that's supposed to be forgotten. You reach the spot where the gymnasium once stood and try to imagine it as it was. Young men training in the morning sunlight, their bronze armor gleaming as they practiced formations that seemed revolutionary at the time. The sacred band taking shape through months of patient drilling, becoming something new under Theban skies. All of it erased in less than a week, but not entirely erased. You've heard stories from travelers, whispered accounts of former Theban soldiers serving as mercenaries in Egyptian armies, Sicilian campaigns, and the endless wars that rage around the edges of the Greek world. The techniques they learned here haven't died with their city. They've spread, evolved, become part of the common knowledge that defines how warfare is conducted. Innovation, it seems, is harder to kill than the men who create it. A bird calls from somewhere in the ruins, a robin singing with determined cheerfulness despite the desolation around it. The sound seems almost defiant, as if nature itself is refusing to acknowledge that this place has become uninhabitable. You think about the Helots, freed by Theban intervention decades ago, now living as citizens in Megalopolis and other Arcadian cities. Their children grow up free, learning to read and write and participate in democratic government. The liberation that began with Theban spears continues in classrooms and assemblies where former slaves debate policy as equals. That, at least, Alexander couldn't destroy. The sun breaks through the gray clouds for a moment, illuminating the ruins with weak winter light. You can see more clearly now the scope of the destruction. Not random vandalism, but systematic demolition designed to ensure that Thebes could never rise again. Every public building destroyed, every defensive wall pulled down, every monument to Theban greatness reduced to rubble. Even the temples were leveled, though Alexander claimed to spare the house of Pindar, the poet, out of respect for cultural achievement. Small mercies in an ocean of methodical erasure. But as you stand here among the ruins, you realize something that Alexander probably didn't intend. Destruction on this scale actually ensures that Thebes will be remembered. A city that simply faded into insignificance might be forgotten within a generation. But a city that was destroyed so completely, so dramatically, becomes a symbol that outlasts its physical existence. Men will tell stories about Thebes for centuries, about its brief moment of greatness, its innovative military tactics, its champion of the oppressed. And in those stories, the ideals that built the sacred band and freed the Helots will continue to inspire new generations of people who refuse to accept that might makes right. A fragment of marble catches your attention, half buried in the winter grass. You brush away the dirt and reveal carved letters, part of an inscription that once honored some civic benefactor whose name is now lost to time. The craftsmanship is exquisite, each letter perfectly formed by some anonymous mason who took pride in his work. Someone cared enough to make this beautiful, even though they knew it might not survive. Perhaps especially because they knew it might not survive. As afternoon fades toward evening, you make your way back through the ruins toward the road that leads to other cities, other stories, other attempts to build something worth preserving. Behind you, the ruins of Thebes settle into twilight silence, their shadows growing longer as the winter sun sinks toward the horizon. But you carry something away from this place. Not despair at the transience of human achievement, but a deeper appreciation for the courage it takes to build anything at all in a world where nothing lasts forever. The sacred band is gone. Epaminondas is dust. The Helots they freed are growing old in distant cities that may themselves fall someday to other conquerors with other innovations. But the idea that ordinary people can transcend their limitations through love, courage, and and systematic thinking about how to make the world better. That idea survives every destruction, every conquest, every attempt to reduce human possibility to the mathematics of superior force. In the gathering darkness, you hear the distant sound of wolves calling to each other from the hills around Thebes. Wild, lonely, beautiful voices that speak of things that endure beyond the rise and fall of cities. Some things, it seems, are too wild to tame, too fundamental to destroy. The empire that killed Thebes will itself fall someday, conquered by barbarians or corrupted by success, or simply worn down by the endless effort required to hold power over unwilling subjects. But somewhere, in some future gymnasium, lovers will train together for battles not yet imagined, inspired by stories of men who fought and died for each other on a plain called Cheronia. The dance continues, even when the dancers are gone. You're sitting by a small fire on a hillside overlooking the valley where Leuctra once changed the world, 50 years after Alexander reduced Thebes to memory and dust. The flames dance in the evening breeze, sending sparks up towards stars that have watched countless empires rise and fall with the same serene indifference. The landscape below shows little trace of that momentous battle. Farmers have plowed the fields where the sacred band once broke the Spartan line, and sheep graze peacefully where bronze met bronze in the clash that ended 3 centuries of assumptions about military invincibility. Time, you've learned, is the great equalizer. A young soldier sits across from you, his armor bearing the insignia of one of the Hellenistic kingdoms that carved up Alexander's empire after his death. He's heard stories about the old days, fragments of legend mixed with family memories, and he wants to understand what really happened when Thebes briefly stood at the center of the Greek world. Tell me about the sacred band, he says, his voice carrying the eager curiosity of someone who's never seen lovers die together for something larger than themselves. You poke the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of orange sparks that disappear into the darkness. How do you explain something that requires you to understand not just tactics and politics, but the revolutionary idea that love could be transformed into the most effective military force the world had ever seen? They were ordinary men who discovered how to become extraordinary together. You begin. 150 pairs of lovers who learned that the deepest human bonds could create tactical advantages no enemy could anticipate or counter. The young soldier nods, but you can see he doesn't really understand yet. His generation has grown up in a world where warfare is conducted by professional armies using standardized tactics. The idea that innovation could emerge from something as simple as redesigning the emotional foundations of military service seems almost quaint. But then, most revolutionary ideas seem obvious only in hindsight. What made them so effective? He asks. You close your eyes and try to summon the memory of watching those pairs train together, each anticipating the other's movements with an intimacy that went far beyond mere military coordination. They fought as single organisms, you explain, not just beside each other, but through each other. When you know exactly how your partner will respond in any situation, when you've shared not just training, but dreams, fears, hopes, the texture of daily life, you become something new, something that's more than the sum of its parts. A owl hoots from somewhere in the darkness, its call echoing off the valley walls before fading into silence. The sound makes you think of all the other nights you've spent on battlefields, listening to similar calls while trying to make sense of the violence you've witnessed. But they all died, the young soldier points out, with the practical clarity of his generation. At Cheronia, facing the Macedonians. If they were so effective, how did they lose? The question contains its own answer, but you try to explain it anyway. They lost because the world changed around them. Philip of Macedon learned their tactics, then improved upon them. He created professional armies with longer spears, better coordination, and the resources of an entire unified kingdom behind them. The sacred band represented the perfection of one approach to warfare, but perfection in one area often means inflexibility when conditions change. You add another piece of wood to the fire, watching as the flames consume it with hungry enthusiasm. The wood doesn't resist. It simply transforms into light and heat and smoke, becoming part of something larger than its original form. Innovation, you continue, as a life cycle. It emerges from necessity, proves its effectiveness, reaches a peak of development, then gets superseded by the next innovation. The sacred band dominated battlefields for 40 years, which is longer than most military advances remain relevant. So they failed. The question hangs in the night air, demanding an answer that goes beyond simple success and failure. No, you say finally. They succeeded at something more important than winning battles. They proved that human beings are capable of transcending their individual limitations through bonds that most people consider weaknesses. You gesture toward the valley below, where moonlight catches the silver thread of a stream winding between fields that have been peaceful for decades. Every military innovation since then has had to account for the psychological factors they discovered. Modern armies train together, eat together, fight together, because commanders understand that emotional bonds make soldiers more effective. The sacred band didn't just change tactics, they changed the fundamental understanding of what makes human beings willing to risk everything for each other. Gawk. The young soldier considers this, staring into the fire as if searching for wisdom in its shifting patterns. What about Epaminondas? The stories make him sound like some kind of philosopher king. You smile at the memory of that tall, thoughtful man who could discuss Pythagorean mathematics one moment and revolutionary military tactics the next. He was a man who understood that the most powerful innovations come from questioning assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. For 3 centuries, Greek warfare followed predictable patterns. Epaminondas asked a simple question: what happens if we do something completely different? A shooting star streaks across the sky above you, bright and brief as a sword blade catching firelight. You've always found something hopeful about shooting stars. They burn out quickly, but they illuminate the darkness for the few moments of their existence. The oblique attack, the reinforced wing, the tactical use of love as a force multiplier. These weren't just military techniques. They were expressions of a fundamentally different way of thinking about problems. Instead of accepting limitations, Epaminondas found ways to transform limitations into advantages. But Thebes fell anyway. Alexander destroyed it completely. Yes, and Alexander's empire fell apart within a generation of his death, and the kingdoms that replaced it are already showing signs of decay. Everything falls, eventually. The question isn't whether your achievements will outlast you. They won't. The question is whether they'll inspire someone else to build something even better. You stand and walk to the edge of the firelight, looking out over the valley where so much history unfolded in such a short span of years. Right now, in some gymnasium in Alexandria or Pergamon or Rome, young men are training together, learning to fight as teams rather than individuals. They probably don't know they're applying lessons that originated with the sacred band, but they are. Innovation spreads like water, finding new channels and new applications long after its original source has been forgotten. The fire crackles behind you, sending shadows dancing across the grass. In those shadows, you can almost see the ghosts of ancient battles. Bronze ranks moving in perfect formation, lovers falling together on distant battlefields, young men discovering that the deepest human connections could be forged into weapons that changed the world. The sacred band lasted 70 years from formation to destruction. You continue. That's barely a lifetime. But the ideas they embodied, that innovation comes from questioning assumptions, that human bonds can be systematically leveraged for tactical advantage, that love and war aren't opposites but different expressions of the same fundamental forces. Those ideas are immortal. You return to the fire and sit down again, feeling the warmth against your face and hands. Someday, probably sooner than anyone expects, Rome will face its own tyranny. Some new power with new innovations will demonstrate that Roman legions aren't invincible after all. And when that happens, the defeated will remember that every empire falls, But every empire also contributes something to the sum total of human knowledge about how to organize society, conduct warfare, and build something worth defending. The young soldier yawns, his eyelids growing heavy as the fire burns lower. Sleep, you tell him gently. Tomorrow you'll return to your unit and continue the work that every generation has to do, learning from the past while preparing for a future that no one can predict. As he settles into his blankets, you remain awake, tending the fire and thinking about all the other campfires on all the other hills where soldiers have gathered to share stories about battles fought by men whose names are already fading into legend. The flames dance lower now, but they still cast enough light to illuminate the immediate surroundings. Beyond that circle of warmth and visibility, the darkness stretches away toward horizons that hold whatever comes next. But within the circle of firelight, for this moment, there's warmth and companionship and the endless human capacity to find meaning in struggle and beauty in courage and hope in the knowledge that love, once kindled, burns on long after the lovers themselves have become memory. The sacred band of human connection continues its dance. One generation teaching the next, each learning something new while preserving something eternal. The fire burns lower, but it doesn't die. Not tonight. The night wind stirs the embers of your hillside fire, sending the last warm sparks up toward stars that have watched human stories unfold for millennia. Your breathing deepens as the flames settle into glowing coals, their orange light growing softer, more dreamlike. Around you, the ancient landscape holds its peaceful silence. Somewhere in that darkness, streams still murmur the same gentle songs they sang when the sacred band marched these paths. Olive trees still rustle their silver leaves in conversations that began before empires learned to rise and fall. The young soldier sleeps peacefully now, his dreams perhaps filled with bronze, armored lovers and philosopher, generals whose names echo through time like distant music. His breathing is steady and calm, synchronized with the eternal rhythms that connect all sleeping things. You pull your cloak closer and let your own eyelids grow heavy. The stories have been told, the fire has burned low, and the night wraps around you like a gentle embrace from all the peaceful moments that have ever existed. In the morning, there will be new paths to walk, new stories to discover. New reasons to believe that love and courage and the patient work of building something beautiful are always worth the effort, no matter how briefly they last. But tonight, here in this circle of warmth and memory, you can simply rest in the knowledge that some things endure not because they last forever, but because they touch something eternal in the human heart. The dance continues even in dreams, especially in dreams. Let sleep come gently now, carrying you toward tomorrow on currents as ancient and reliable as the streams that still sing in these timeless valleys. Rest well, traveler. The best stories, like the deepest dreams, are the ones that stay with us long after the telling ends.